Good morning, everybody. I guess most of us must have had some late nights last night, so in any case, thank you all for coming. We've asked you to join us to discuss the ongoing UNESCO comprehensive study on internet-related issues. Some of you may know the background for this. It came as a result of the UNESCO's General Conference last year in November, which was triggered by the events following the Snowden affair, and member states were not on the same page on what the roles and responsibilities of UNESCO should be in relation to internet-related issues. Some wanted normative instruments, some guidelines, etc., but in the end, they've compromised to ask the Secretariat to undertake a comprehensive study with as extensive consultation as possible with all stakeholders, insofar as internet impacts significantly on what UNESCO does in its mandate as it relates to education, the sciences, both natural and social and human sciences, culture, both tangible and intangible, and more importantly, our sector on communication and information that deals with freedom of expression, free flow of information, and ICT-related issues in terms of building knowledge societies. We have put out concept notes and we've distributed questionnaires for which I strongly encourage you to give us feedback, and we will certainly appreciate that. And this is one of the consultations we're having. We've had a number of consultations in different fora, and we will continue this. And this will probably come to an end when we're planning to have an international conference in Paris. You might want to note the dates if you could join us. The 3rd and the 4th of March 2015. That would basically will discuss the first draft of the report or the study that would then feed into the General Conference of UNESCO in November 2015. That will be attended by 195 countries. Should that report be endorsed in one form or another, that will also feed into the event that will be taking place at the UN General Assembly to discuss WSIS Plus 10 review. So there are lots of issues at stake, and we certainly encourage you to give us as much feedback as possible. So with that general introduction, let me hand over to my two colleagues, Professors Guy and Professor Indrajit, who with me are leading the study in our communication and information sector at UNESCO. Guy?
Thank you. Could we have the PowerPoint, please?
Okay, a very good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for coming and joining us today for this very important consultation meeting on our comprehensive study on internet-related issues. I'll run you through a few fundamental concepts and the basis for the study, and then pass on to my colleague Guy for looking through the questionnaire and other details. So what is the scope of the study as mandated by our member states? It has to cover the issue of access to information and knowledge, and as you must have heard in many of the sessions here, the question of access still remains complex, elusive, and we need to find solutions to that. The second major issue or topic that the study will cover is freedom of expression. As you know, it's one of UNESCO's core mandates, and we have been one of the leading players in this sphere for many years now. The third key issue is the issue of privacy. Again, lots of controversy, lots of debates on this issue. We need to delve into this issue more deeply and try and figure out its various dimensions and how to handle this very complex problem of privacy or the breach of it. And last but not least, the ethical dimension of the information society. It's kind of an overarching problem because it covers all the other issues too and more. And we need to see what could be some of the ethical principles on which the internet could be approached. And of course, possible options for future actions in these fields. Last but not least, we have compiled an extensive questionnaire, which I'm sure you've seen, it's online. And these questions are going to help us get your feedback, get suggestions, get ideas, and fine-tune the study as we go along. Now, how do we frame such a study dealing with 4 rather complex issues which have overlaps but are by themselves very significant? I mean, you could do a comprehensive study just on one of these issues, but we chose, because of the mandate given to us by the member states, to cover all the 4 issues. Now, we are framing this entire study within the concept of internet universality, which is based on 4 key principles. It has to be human rights based, it has to be open, it has to be accessible to all, accessible in the largest sense of the term, including people with disabilities and so on. And of course, it has to be based on a multi-stakeholder partnership and engagement. So these 4 principles will constitute the benchmark, the framework, by which we will be addressing all the 4 issues that I mentioned earlier. And this way we think that we'll have quite a comprehensive and holistic coverage, at the same time be able to look at overlaps and look at synergies between issues, synergies between principles, and so on. Now, if we look at these, the 4 issues as well as the options, and we look at how we're going to frame it within the internet universality concept, we have rights, openness, accessibility, and multi-stakeholder. Then, within all the 4 issues, there are rights elements, rights aspects. So we will have to filter through that. How do rights affect access, expression, freedom of expression, privacy, and ethics? Similarly, when it comes to multi-stakeholder engagement, they cut across all the lines. So there too, it will be, I would say, a multidisciplinary, a very holistic approach which has to be engaged in order to be able to see how each of the elements of the framing can cut across all the 4 issues that we're talking about. So this gives you an idea of how complex the study is likely to be. Even within, I would say, some of the issues themselves, between privacy and freedom of expression, there are going to be issues, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be overlaps, and we'll have to sift through all that in order to get a much clearer picture on what the issues are. If you want to take this unpacking a little further, you will see that for each of the 4 issues as well as the options, we will have a series of issues which will appear. We hope that the questionnaires will actually contribute significantly to deciphering these issues, and therefore be able to deal with most of the key issues that come under the scope of all of these 4 key topics that we're going to deal with in this study. Now, in terms of questions, under each of the 4 issues, we have formulated a series of questions, and we expect to get a very comprehensive sets of answers. We have done a series of consultation meetings already with member states and in different fora like the World Summit on Information Society, like the IGF here today, and many other conferences and events. And we are gathering all this information in order to be able to address these questions. Question 1, how do we reinforce the rights to seek and receive information online? This again is becoming a big issue. You know that for some years now, the Right to Information Acts have been adopted in several countries, not really by every one of them, but we hope that this is going to take this entire agenda forward. What policies can boost open knowledge resources and digital heritage? And here we're also, of course, talking about open educational resources, open access to scientific repositories, digital heritage, which is in dire need of preservation. And once we do preserve this rich digital heritage of the world, then access to these resources would be enabled. How can accessibility be facilitated through greater progress in social inclusion online and local content and language? Several sessions here dealt with the question of accessibility, as well as the question of multilingualism and linguistic and cultural diversity in cyberspace. UNESCO itself has a recommendation, the only binding instrument that we have in this particular area, and I think this will be an extremely important question that we must address in this study. And last but not least, how can media and information literacy, again one of UNESCO's major programs now, be integrated in education so as to empower multi-stakeholder participation online. I think a lot of the issues and a lot of the challenges that we face today are largely due to lack of awareness, lack of ignorance, due to ignorance, and these can be to a great extent addressed by a comprehensive approach towards media and information literacy. With that now I pass you on to my colleague Gregor.
So the second topic we have to look at is freedom of expression, and again we looked at the rights aspect, the open aspect, accessibility aspect, and the multi-stakeholder aspect. So the rights question, first we just started to say what are the emerging challenges on freedom of expression. I won't go into that. We hope our speakers shortly will give us some insight into those. Particularly as regards the rights, we are interested in this question of how are laws that relate to offline impacting on the online. Is there any special protection that's needed for digital expression? That, by the way, is also dealing with the issue of everyone speaks about the mantra of permissionless innovation. So are you talking about permissionless speech on the internet, or what about the trend whereby people are being licensed in certain countries now to express themselves on the internet? The third topic, which goes to the openness side, is what kind of policies can actually assist the openness of freedom of expression so that you don't have monopolies, that you have maximum pluralism, and what happens also to keep it an open environment whereby sources of journalists don't feel chilled or intimidated to come forward and speak with journalists, given the whole digital footprints that are left when people communicate digitally. The fourth thing is what literacies. Again, we come back to the media and information literacy, but particularly how do we deal with this question of violations of freedom of speech online, such as hate speech, and how do we define that hate speech, and how do we encourage users to respond to this and understand it and deal with the kind of trolls and so on, because this is an issue that goes way beyond law and legal capacity to deal with hate speech. It's a question of user empowerment also. It's a question of counter speech and so on. And then the multi-stakeholder issue. This is a huge and complex area. More and more intermediary companies are organizing some kind of self-regulation about what decisions they should make when they are approached by individuals or governments or other companies to interfere with content or to give up user data. So to what extent is multi-stakeholder participation in that self-regulation system an issue to look at going ahead? So moving on to the third topic, we have to look at the privacy. Again, we have the rights, openness, accessibility, multi-stakeholder, ROAM. So the right side of the privacy is how do we strengthen the respect for privacy on the internet? And a related question is, if you want your right to privacy to be respected, to what extent do you have a subsidiary entitlement to encryption and anonymity? And what's the connection between those two, and what's the connection between those two and privacy? Openness, this is a distinct issue, but it's very interesting. Everybody is calling for more and more transparency, more and more open data. Open government partnership exists, for example. But how do you balance that transparency with privacy? What are the issues around anonymization of data? The fourth thing on the accessibility, how can privacy and media information literacy deal with this so that people feel able and safe to participate online and don't feel intimidated? So what kinds of things can respect privacy? And you're dealing with issues like cyber stalking. You're dealing with issues about your basic literacy about what kinds of discourse you use, protocols, and so on the internet. And then the last thing here is what kind of multi-stakeholder arrangements could help balance privacy and other rights, the right to reputation, the right to safety. These are obviously the huge debates around national security versus privacy and so on. So what kind of multi-stakeholder involvement could be there? You may know the General Assembly has called for every government to review its intelligence operations to see if they are sufficiently transparent and have independent oversight. Well, to what extent is multi-stakeholder participation possible, desirable, important in the oversight of intelligence operations as a way to get a good balancing of the rights? If you remember our internet universality, those 4 pillars, the first pillar was the R, the rights, and the last quadrant was the M. So if you're going to balance rights, how can you use multi-stakeholderism to inform a good balancing of your rights? So those are the first 3 sections, and I give you back to my colleague.
In fact, in recent years, many of the most vibrant, I would say, debates around the internet have been discussing the importance of ethical issues. They are no longer technical issues only, they are no longer political issues only. There are a whole large set of ethical questions which arise when discussing the internet. So our approach is to find out how can ethical principles based on human rights advance all the 4 principles on which the internet universality concept is based, namely accessibility, openness, and multi-stakeholder participation on the internet. And this, of course, is a very complex domain. UNESCO has done significant work in the past, including the preparation of a code of ethics on the internet, which was developed under the Information for All program several years ago, and that document still exists. But new elements, new issues have come up, and we need to address them as we go along. What ethical frameworks or processes could serve to inform and assess open uses of the net? Again here, even with relation to access issues, openness issues, there are lots of ethical challenges and dilemmas which need to be addressed. And we hope that we will get some concrete feedback from all of you and our other constituencies in order to be able to address these rather complex issues. And then we come to the question of accessibility, whether you look at very specific groups of marginalized people or accessibility in general. There are great ethical considerations that crop up and need to be discussed. So in what way can ethical and social inclusion dimensions enhance accessibility? I think for far too long, accessibility has been limited to a very technical concept related to connectivity. But that's not it. Today there are far more complex issues revolving around, and the question of accessibility which need to be addressed. And how can ethical sensitivity inform multi-stakeholder involvement in law regulation and other decision-making processes relating to the internet? And here too, you see that, as my colleague Guy mentioned earlier, that even in this whole multi-stakeholder debate, this multi-stakeholder approach, there are different issues which will require different partners of the multi-stakeholder group to be more or less involved. And here too there will be a lot of ethical sensitivity as to who takes the lead in what specific dimension of the operation of the internet. We come to some broader issues. We need to also examine what are the existing frameworks in each of these fields of study. There's a lot of work which has been done, so we need to perform a rather comprehensive scan of what has been accomplished and extract perhaps the best elements, the best inputs from those. The whole question of cross-jurisdictional issues which impact both on freedom of expression, privacy, and other aspects of the internet, and how do we deal with these? Again, this we anticipate is going to be an extremely challenging task, but at least if we get some light on current issues, I think that will be a step forward. Intersections, I mentioned this before, between freedom of expression and privacy, access and ethics, and so on, and normative or empirical responses which are sought. With that, I'll pass you back to my colleague, Guy.
We're almost at the end of our side of things, just to say that we are asking questions also on options, particularly for UNESCO's mandate. What role does UNESCO play, particularly on these issues, vis-a-vis other organizations in the UN system? What's our relationship to stakeholders outside the UN system? We're asking questions about our internal priorities at UNESCO. UNESCO has priorities gender equality and Africa, so this study should inform our work in those areas. The post-2015 development agenda, which is developing the Sustainable Development Goals, small island development states, and the decade for the rapprochement of cultures. So as you can see, this is an enormous study, and we have to come with answers that hopefully will take knowledge forward and produce a sweet spot where member states can find value in what is proposed and agree on it. We are not going to try to come with stuff that is just too contested to be of any value. We will try and identify those key issues where UNESCO can make progress and where member states can also make progress in terms of the issues raised in this whole study. So quickly, the timetable. Right now we're doing these consultations. Thank you everybody for being here. As our Deputy Director General mentioned, this is a very important conference because this is not an academic study just for the sake of science. It goes straight into policy making, and it will affect other processes that are ongoing, such as the WSIS review, even could influence the future of IGF. We'll do a progress report. We'll have then the study finalized, and finally we'll have this report in November 2015. As you may know, in December 2015, the future of WSIS will be decided at the General Assembly. So we really encourage people to please use this opportunity to help us do the best study possible that can really make a difference. Your input will really enrich the kind of answers that we can come up with. That's a URL, but you can Google also, or not only Google, you can use other social search engines as well. But we want your responses. The deadline is the end of November. So that sort of ends our part of the presentation. So now we get into the more new stuff, I think, trying to hear from experts from around the world what views they have. I want to also thank our colleague Zhan Hong, who's organized this whole thing, and we don't waste it. I sometimes forget to thank her for her work, but she identified and briefed and recruited our experts, and she's also taking notes. So the very discussion here will be one of the inputs into the study. So this is not just a talk shop here. We've asked our experts to address two questions. I hope we can get through each person with two, because we have a number of experts. Let me introduce them very quickly so that I won't introduce them later, and then we'll just go through them person by person. So on my right here is Sylvia Grundmann, who works for the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. She's head of the Media Division in the Information Society Department of the Directorate General Human Rights and Rule of Law. Then Carl Wettermark, is he here, Carl? No, okay. Then we have Marion Franklin, at Goldsmiths College, and she's very active in civil society issues, particularly around the Internet, IGF's Dynamic Coalition on Internet Principles and Freedoms, and the charter then. Then we have, sorry, that's Marion Franklin over there, if you could just wait. Then we have Serene Unal over here in the, what color do you call your tie? Okay. Thank you. She's at Ankara University and very interested in these issues. Teaches in internet law and civil law. Nigel Hickson, sitting on her right, is Vice President for Intergovernmental Organizations Engagement at ICANN. Pedro Les Andrade, on the left over there, is Director for Government Affairs and Public Policy for Latin America at Google. And Lillian Nalwoga over here is President of the Internet Society Uganda chapter and works closely with CIPESA, which is the collaboration on international ICT policy in East and Southern Africa. So these are our great speakers. Oh, sorry, I need to turn the page. Avery Doria, I think, needs no introduction. She was the chair of the ICANN Non-Commercial Stakeholder Group Executive Committee and is an expert in all these issues and a member of the Faculty of International Summer Schools and Internet Governance. With that introduction, I think we could proceed to asking our speakers to speak. So we'll try and go through this fairly systematically. Hopefully we'll have some remote participation. Can the remote moderator, thank you very much for your assistance, but can you wave if there are remote participants, because from this age and this distance it's a bit difficult to see if you just put your flag. So let me now pass back to our Deputy Director General, and he could call on the speakers to, he can tell you what question they're going to address, and so let's go through them one by one. So, first is
Pedro.
Pedro,
You're going to deal with what can be done to reinforce our rights to seek and receive information in the online environment.
Yes.
Very broad question.
Very broad, but I want to
Very
focus.
limited time.
I'm going to focus only on one issue, and in fact, I link this question to other two. So, if you don't mind, I will address all together 1, 7, and 15. So, the other two questions are: how can legislation in a diverse range of fields, which impacts on the internet, respect freedom of expression in line with international standards, and what kind of arrangement can help to safeguard the exercise of privacy in relation to other rights. So the topic that I picked to address these three questions all together is right to be forgotten. And I think that, in connection with the first question, we need to bring balance to the discussions around right to be forgotten online, which I think that they present serious challenges for the operation of search engines as key tools to seek and receive information. But also we think that an unbalanced approach will undermine the principles set forth a long time ago in many countries, and they are building right now in others, on the limitation of liability of internet intermediaries, which has been one of the key policies that help the information society to flourish. We are seeing scenarios of abuse that could lead to indirect censorship, for example, in this regard. We all know about a recent judicial decision on the European Union about the scope of the European Directive on Data Protection. And this is the balance between privacy, data protection, and freedom of expression and access to information. This precedent is at some point justifying broader attempts outside the European Union, not only to remove links to content that might result inconvenient or outdated, but also to remove the content itself from social networks or websites. So we are seeing a broader approach, in particular in Latin America, where I'm working. So these are and that without a judicial order. This is basically removing content without having a judicial order and putting the intermediaries in the role of the judges. So how can going to this second question, how can legislation can address this? I think that a good exercise will be to implement the principles set forth in the Joint Declaration of Freedom of Expression on the Internet. This was signed by the rapporteurs of expression for the OIS, the UN, also the rapporteurs working on free expression in Europe and in Africa. And there are many countries already adopting them in their own legislation. We have the latest example with Mexico, that basically took the principles as a guidance for the reform of their constitution in terms of free expression and the internet. And lastly, when we ask ourselves what kind of arrangements can help to safeguard the exercise of privacy in relation to other rights. The important thing to keep in mind here is that given the interconnect nature of the internet, nowadays few things could happen in isolated. So basically we need this balanced approach to find the best solutions that are also the less restrictive ones to the rest of the rights. So when we're trying to solve issues related to privacy, we need to find those solutions that are the less restrictive ones to the rest of the rights that could be involved as freedom of expression or access to information. So that will be all.
Thank you, Pedro. I must admit I've got incredible difficulty in trying to understand what it means to be the right to be forgotten. I guess, lawyers, we're going to spend a lot of time trying to decipher that. I prefer that we've adopted the right to be forgiven, not forgotten. But that's an issue for another day. So let me ask Nigel to deal with the kind of mechanisms we need to develop for policies and common standards for open licensed educational resources and scientific repositories, and for the long-term preservation of digital heritage. Nigel, take it away. I was told that is bang on there. No?
Put his name on that. Well, okay, we can move on to Avery then.
Okay, well, we've now volunteered here, Avi, please. Yeah.
Wait a second. There is Nigel.
No, he did. He was trash.
Okay. I will do that now.
Freedom of
Yes,
expression,
yes, thank you.
So we're still talking access, so maybe we should
So then we
access.
continue with access post, yes.
So let's have Avery on access.
Okay. We seem to be having a logistics problem. So the next question is, how can greater progress be made as regards inclusive strategies for women and girls, as well as marginalized and disabled persons?
Okay, thank you. Avi Doria speaking. And yeah, the right to be forgiven is important, and I'll probably need to be forgiven. So in looking at that one, it almost looks like an impossible problem, because even in places where a legislation could be built, we've had discussions for decades on inclusion, on mainstreaming, whether it's of women, marginalized population. I work with the LGBTQI community, and the abuse that community gets, the disabled. Even if you legislate, and in fact some people legislate against these groups, so I guess a first step would be to help stop legislation against various populations, which we see, whether it's a minority population that's discriminated against, Then there's enabling legislations that are probably needed. But I don't put a whole lot of faith in legislation, because legislation is something that you can force through, but then what's to say that that legislation will be honored, that legislation will be upheld, or that the population itself won't go beyond that? And so, in fact, I think the real problem comes down to how do you change mindsets on a lot of those? How do you, in order to make progress? We've seen situations, they get better. For example, even when digital technology is brought into communities, it's often put into all-male spaces. Even when people can gain access to technology, access to that technology, if not filtered on, is used as a semaphore to notify authorities. This happens in women's issues and radical women's issues, especially in some of the sexual freedom issues. It happens with LGBTQI issues in countries where it is illegal to be gay. You end up going for information on how to survive being gay. You end up notifying others that here's somebody to go harass. So when I look at how that can be done, the mindset of populations, the mindset, and that's something that I think UNESCO is well placed to do, and that's something that is done through media. We have seen in the commercial environment how good programs can convince people, can change mindsets. Very often, legislation to prohibit something doesn't work, but media campaigns that use all of the media modes from internet to television to radio to print that basically constantly give an image of women's equality, of education for girls, of the equality of minority populations, of assisting the enabling technologies for the disabled, that those campaigns do eventually. We've seen that a media campaign can turn a population to hate, but we've also seen that a media population can enable. So in terms of that, yes, we need legislation to really enforce the equality that we find in human rights declarations. But more than the legislation, we need media campaigns to basically really focus on changing the mindset of people so that they can be enabled to gain access, to be included. Thanks.
Thank you, Avri. I think most of us will agree with you that legislation alone is not enough, and we really need to work, all of us, in different parts and different roles to change mindsets. We just only have to remember that it was in 1948 we've had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and including Article 19 on freedom of expression. 66 years down the line, we're still struggling to get that right respected. So that tells you that legislation alone is not enough, and we need to change minds, and that's why UNESCO's Constitution clearly says that wars are made in the minds of men, and it's in the minds of men that the defense of peace must be constructed, and that equally applies to many aspects of rights issues.
And if I can add, in the minds of women as well.
Nigel, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nigel Hickson. I do apologise because I wanted to say a few words on on A1, if I could, while we're on the access dimension, along with my colleague for Google. I won't talk about right to be forgotten, but I just wanted to reference something which I think is important here in relation to access to information and the right to receive information in the online environment. I think this is of absolute crucial importance, and I think it's something we take for granted. We have discussions over net neutrality, we have discussions over access to information in terms of people that might prevent people having information. And no doubt we can touch on that, because those are very important issues as well. But I just wanted to refer to the importance of, if you like, the non-fragmented internet. And in ICANN we have a responsibility, as you know, to maintain an interoperable and a universal and an open domain name system. And an open, universal, and a single domain name system, I think, is very important when we look at access to information, because if we end up with a fragmented domain name system, then the ability of people to access information can be greatly diminished. And although I'm not suggesting that overnight we're going to go to a fragmented domain name system, what I am suggesting is that we have to be very wary in our international negotiations that we enact the best policies, and whether that ends up in legislation, of course, is a completely different aspect. But we need to enact policies that is going to keep the internet open, but also going to keep the internet non-fragmented. And if we look at some of the discussions that took place back at the Wicket, some of the proposals that might be put forward to the Plenipotentiary Conference in a couple of months' time, or even a month's time, in Busan in Korea, proposals from different member states. If we look at some of the proposals that indeed were put forward during the WSIS preparatory process and might be discussed at the WSIS high-level meeting in the UN General Assembly in 2015, then I think we have to take these issues very seriously, that in terms of the policies, in terms of the legislation that national states enact, we have to pay a lot of attention to that we only have one domain name system, that we have a truly unified internet, and that we don't have a fragmented situation where people are going to find it very difficult to access information. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're moving into the next batch of questions and to hear what our experts have to say about them. So the next field is, that was access, the right to be forgotten, and what that means for access, and gender and sexuality issues, and access, and domain names and access. Now we're moving into freedom of expression. Sylvia Grundmann, you're going to help us answer a couple of these questions combined. So I won't repeat all the questions. You give us all the answers.
Thank you very, very much, Guy, but whether I can give all the answers and right now here, that's another question. In terms of right to access, I would just like to recall that the European Court for Human Rights, in the case of Yildirim against Turkey, has stressed that the right of access to the internet is fundamental for the right to freedom of expression. So there we have the link, and that shows you also where we as the Council of Europe are coming from. So we have the court's case law that we will feed into the study, but then also the standard setting that's being done in the Committee of Ministers, with the help of the work of the respective steering committee that I'm the secretary to. That's the CDMSI, the Committee on Media and Information Society. And there has been a lot of standard setting, but we are now also on track of looking more into implementation and then implementation gaps. So that is the general line we will take to feed into this study. I would also like to say that we very warmly welcome the study for its comprehensive approach, and it is really a very big task. We all can only benefit from it, and the rights-based approach, of course, is crucial here. Now, more concretely, I would like to touch on question number 6, tying a bit into 7 and then also 8. Now, challenges, I think there are very many challenges for us. In my particular field at the moment, we focus on safety of journalists. For us, this is currently the biggest challenge. Why? Because the topic has been out there since the beginning of journalism. We have the controversies there about journalists, what is a journalist in the digital age? We prefer now to talk about journalists and other media actors, but as it might be well aware to you, we have member states that prefer a much narrower definition, and we'll have to work on that. Therefore, I think UNESCO is too modest here, and they have not even mentioned their work on digital safety for journalists. So I think the work of UNESCO is very much here coherent, and I'm very happy for that, and we can very much benefit, all of us. So safety of journalists, the biggest challenge there. I see a link there also to the topic of surveillance, the stifling effect of it, the sources protection, and when we look into that, we have to look into the international standards. Are they sufficient enough? What else can we do there to arrive at a better protection? Finally, the need for specific protection of freedom of expression on the internet, I would like to mention defamation laws there. The defamation laws in most countries, in all countries that I know of, have been made for offline situations. And I think we need to look into that, whether they fit for the online age. And maybe we want to also think about some models, maybe even a model law there. We have commissioned a study also on blocking and filtering. I should mention that, but whether we will have sufficient results to feed in within the deadline remains to be seen, but we are also looking into that. I mentioned surveillance, and we have a big chapter on privacy. I won't be able to go into details here, but we'll feed into that also. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, that's a good segue to the third field, which is privacy. And we have Seren and then Lillian. And Pedro, maybe we can come back to you at the end, because you did indicate you have something to say in that field, but just to make sure we can get every speaker. So, Seren, would you like to go first on answering what is your view of one or two of the...
Yeah, I personally picked the relationship between privacy, anonymity, and encryption, as I thought it was very relevant these days. Privacy is without any doubt protected legally in every other jurisdiction in various forms, but it's under legal protection, and everybody has consensus that people should have the right to privacy. Anonymity, there's no such consensus whether it's an absolute right, people's right to remain anonymous, but it's still important for people speaking up their minds. And also it's crucial for freedom of expression, especially in oppressive societies and questionable democracies. It's quite important. So in the last couple of years, I think all around the world we've been witnessing a struggle between governments and individual users, especially when they're trying to bypass the biggest threat to privacy, which is surveillance and filtering. So while individual users are trying to bypass surveillance and filtering, they use privacy-enhancing tools supported by encryption technologies. So this is a fact that we all know, and some of us tried and experienced. But what if, my Star Wars language, the government strike back, and let's say in a fictional country far, far away, while the users are trying to bypass a ban, the government puts pressure on the ISPs so that altered DNS servers were being intercepted by ISPs. So how are you going to address that? That's, I think, the most crucial thing we need here is transparency and accountability, but these standards should be applied to all the actors involved, the governments, the intermediaries, state agencies. So how are we going to regulate these things? Do we ever have to regulate these things? It's also, over-regulation is also another risk. Because when you have too strict, too rigid rules that will allow no flexibility when it comes to technological developments and other kinds of changes. So a case-by-case analysis is crucial. So when we're looking at the future, what do we want? I think the whole concept of universality is quite nice, so the transformation from the Internet of Things to universality. And are we going to strive for a user-centric, rights-based Internet or government state-centric Internet, and how the Internet ecosystem will survive? How are we going? The law is all about, the first year in law school, it's all the professors tell us, the law is all about balancing the interests of the parties involved. So how are we going to address it? I think we're going to see it over time. And I'd like to start a discussion about the impact of big data, how it's going to shape the world, whether if it's really the capital of the 21st century, So how will it shape the industry? How will it shape the regulation? How will it shape liability issues? So one fits for all approach for ISPs. So all access providers are equal, but how about all intermediaries? They are all subject to a one fits for all approach, liability regime, but how will big data impact the whole industry and the whole internet ecosystem? So I think that's all for now.
Okay, thank you so much. So that helps us deepen the privacy field, and we certainly hope at UNESCO you will write up your thoughts and send them in as a submission.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So Lillian, also on privacy.
Thank you, Guy. Lillian from Uganda. I think I have two questions on privacy. How can security of personal data be enhanced? And how can media and information literacy be developed to assist individuals to protect their privacy? And I think somehow some of these have been touched by her, and also Avery mentioned some few aspects about media and information literacy. However, in terms of protecting security of personal data, I think to me, I see two aspects. This study comes at a time when it's really necessary to know what are people doing. And we have people who are just excited to get on the internet, you know. They don't know how far they can go. They're just excited to get on the internet. And in the age of social media, where new applications, new innovations are just coming up, I think the most important thing is about awareness creation, you know. And we've seen cases, I think it's not, I'll not just say just in my country or say in Africa, or I think it's a global thing. People are not aware that the internet is a global thing. Once you're on the internet, you've opened up your entire life to everyone because there's no jurisdiction. So issues of creating awareness of what the impact of internet could be leading to your personal life is interesting. It's something that should be taken on. And we are seeing nowadays, we do run campaigns on how to, you know, promote freedom of expression online. And the key message we tell, especially the youth who get so much excited about likes of Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, is employers nowadays are going on to, you know, doing a social search on you, and they see stuff that may impact you. So stuff like that, personal data, you know, in the era of all sorts of crimes is important. But also awareness in terms of digital safety, how to be safe, is something that should be looked into. And it's not just it's a global thing. On question number 2, still, how can the media or information literacy be developed to assist individuals to protect their privacy? I think Avery mentioned something about media campaigns. We've seen the media being a root cause of so many problems. I think there was, I was just reading in terms of, there's this celebrity, forgetting her name, Jennifer something, whose pictures leaked on the, or, you know, on the internet, and the media just enhanced, you know, that. It just like blasted it out. So I think media needs to be taught how to protect individuals in terms of, I mean, in times when such information leaks, how can the media, you know, work around, you know, just protecting individuals, you know, in terms of, you know, when violations on the internet do occur, not just them splashing out, you know, further reinforcing the other person's privacy concerns. And I think still the issue of capacity building, probably they don't know anything about internet rights or internet freedoms. They don't understand the concept, so it's one of those things that I think needs to be taken into play. I'll end at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So That was very illuminating. Please write it down and send it to us. And so let's have Marion, who's going to speak on the ethics field, the ethics topic. And then afterwards, I suggest we pause, we get some comments from the floor, and then we have a last quick round here. Marion, ethics.
Hi, thanks very much. In that section, I'm looking at question 21. Just so that people in the room know which question that is, could someone read it out? I've got my text up here.
The question is, what conceptual frameworks or processes of inquiry can help analyze, assess, and inform choices that confront stakeholders in new social uses and applications of information and knowledge?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to put on my, my academic hat here, because this is what pays my wages and allows me to get to these things. I would like to I'd like to advocate a much more multidisciplinary approach to the sort of research that we are doing. What I admire about these 30 questions is, whilst they're extraordinarily wide-ranging and daunting to consider in one sitting, they do bring into the picture that there are many, many ways to actually research what is going on. We're looking at everyday life. We're looking at people getting excited about making contact with new people, finding news sources that they never had before. And what we lack, at least in this setting, is to understand that there's an enormous amount of ethnographic research that is based on longitudinal studies that gets very, very close to communities, groups of users, individuals, particularly in parts of the world that are going online. And this has been happening right from day one, right from the first day that the World Wide Web in the 1990s was available in a very open access form. Things have changed a lot, but my first research was looking at young people going online to talk about sport, love, friendship, but very quickly realizing this was a space in which they could have political discussions, sensitive discussions about sexuality, about family life, and about what democracy was in their country, in parts of the world controlled by very authoritarian, non-democratic governments. We forget how powerful that space is online, and we need to get research in here, in this particular space in which we're meeting, that actually deals with the granular and the most diverse ways in which people really do use the internet. Quantitative indicators are very important, survey work is very important, but we need to get to the stories and the narratives and the deep experience of what people are saying. Why, for instance, they want to be in a chat room that is password protected, and why that chat room for them is extremely important, that it protects their anonymity from prying family members if they're coming to terms with their sexuality, if they're having issues with bullying. We also want to think about the sorts of things people are making. The internet is a meaning-making space, how people actually discuss what the world is to them. It's also the access point more and more for people to get to the world. So there's plenty of research out there from anthropology departments, media and communications department, that are multi-method, meaning they use quantitative work, but they also get down close, and of course the sort of work I do, so I'm very fond of it. Speak to people, watch what people do with their permission. This is observation with consent. And ask ourselves as researchers, what are we seeing here? That detail, that nitty-gritty stuff, if we can get that into our discussions here and get away from this always the survey level, we can link that survey information with the really individual group and community uses of any form of internet media. And we will start to see different ways to design it, different ways to access it, and we will understand the many myriad uses to which the internet is put. That is far more than terrorism, far more than child pornography, far more than criminal activities. I would like us to see how the research shows the joyful, exciting ways in which people are making sense of the world in which they live. And it's happening, the research is out there. So this is my chance to make a plug for multidisciplinary, multi-level, and multi-method approaches to the work we need to understand what we're doing here. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion. You can see a professor says more research is needed, so her answer to the questions is we need more research, which is very important because this study should also set an agenda for more research exactly along those lines. But if you have some of that research already, please.
Yes, I just want to say not just more, we always want more research, but to get into this conversation, an enormous amount of research that is already out there.
Thank you so much. Well, anybody else like to comment on the points made, on other questions or thoughts that you think would enhance the study? Could you introduce yourselves also when you speak? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll come back. Please keep it quite short.
Thank you. Andriy Pazyuk, Ukraine Non-Commercial Users Constituency. I have two questions to the team. First of all, the concept of universality, one of the main issues is the openness of internet. And you mentioned open knowledge, open exchange of expression, openness related to privacy, open uses of the net. But you don't mention open internet concept based on architecture principles of internet openness. I mean, end-to-end principle, closely linked to network neutrality and non-discrimination principles related to the content and tools used by how you are going to address and such issue. And the second question related to international law issues, because universality means universality in approaches. At the current stage, we can see universality at international level related to standards related to freedom of speech, privacy protection, hate speech in different jurisdictions in the inter-American system, and the Council of Europe approaches are very different in related to hate, related to commercial speech, political speech protection, protection of personal data in private sector. Such issues like hate speech and defamation of religion and so on. How your study could address differences in such fields? Thank you for your response.
Thanks. My name is Courtney Raj from the Committee to Protect Journalists. As someone who worked on a very complicated study like this, I have a couple of questions. How are you going to get into the details? Are you going to be allowed to discuss specific case examples, specific countries or region? Is it going to be a regional approach? I think this kind of builds on the previous question, but to what extent are you going to get at, different approaches? Is the goal to have to have a recommendation at the end, or just to provide a picture of how that looks? Also, on the concept of the ethics dimension of multi-stakeholderism, to what extent will that look at the often vast gap between what states say or sign on to in resolutions or normative frameworks, and then the actual implementation and actions taken on the ground, or for that matter, companies potentially the same way, and to what extent will that then result in some sort of recommendation in terms of bridging that gap, or in terms of how to have a multi-stakeholder approach where those ethical dimensions are actually considered. And then, the last dimension, I think, is to make sure to make this paper relevant, because it's going to take some time to get this concept developed. It's a very complicated one. To what extent will you look to the future, such as the Internet of Things, as we discussed at the Press Freedom Dimensions of Internet Governance panel, looking at how some of these things might be translated in the future, surveillance, not only translated in the future, but also then, you mentioned in the last slide, the interconnectedness of various aspects. So, the combination of things like data retention, right to privacy, surveillance, and tracking, and then the implications of that, and really maybe trying to look forward so that it's not just looking backwards.
Walid?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Bhaskar Bhattacharjee. I am from Bangladesh. I am a person with disabilities. I am the visual impaired person. I would like to give one information and one questions. You will be very glad to know that for the first time in the history of Bangladesh, all the primary school textbooks we have converted in the DAISY standard. That means it is converted in Unicode, digital braille, full text, full audio, multimedia books, and makes available to the National Content Repository. This is a government-run website, so anyone from anywhere can access the books. So this is once supported by Prime Minister Office and UNDP, and it is a joint initiatives. This is what I am trying to say. People with disability disabilities is an issue in the internet governance and also the ICT, information communication technology. Accessibility is biggest barrier for us. We don't have any high quality text to speech. That's why our book production is very expensive. We need to use the human voice. And also it is, there is no open source or good quality braille transcription software in our region. So that's why we need to work together to find out the solutions, how we can ensure the accessible information for the people with disabilities. This is a mandate of UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and UN agencies should come forward more actively, especially in the developing country. In our country, we are seeing that sometimes UN agencies are a little bit reluctant about the accessibility issues. So I think we can send a message to the country level UN agencies that they should include the people with disabilities in any development agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great. Walid Al-Sakaf.
Walid Al-Sakaf from Yemen, but currently is teaching in Sweden media communications at Örebro University. As an academic, I've actually looked into the survey and realized how long it is to fill it out. I've been trying to find time to do it right now with those thoughts, but apparently it was too long. The idea behind the survey may have been, in my opinion, more constructive had it had more optional, let's say, multiple choice options apart from the open-ended questions, because I understand from a methodological point of view, you cannot always use quantitative data analysis in these cases, which is oftentimes more convenient in such a very short time. So I'm not sure how we'll be able to manage the data. Nonetheless, many of the questions are extremely relevant, and one of them that caught my attention was what would you do in terms of educational standards? And one interesting experience that I personally had coming from Yemen, where I studied until secondary class and then moving on to other countries and now in Sweden, I've come to understand that some countries have developed quite ahead, like Sweden and Nordic countries and the US and so forth. So they already have a very well established educational, let's say, standard where libraries share information and educational institutes already have a digital infrastructure. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, there may be a very strong reason to adopt those ideas in many other countries, perhaps transitional countries first and then developing countries. It would not be possible immediately to migrate a system like that to Yemen, let's say, or some other countries, but there could be a means of converting the knowledge, the know-hows, so that the local environment could work their way bottom up. So that's one approach that I would see very reasonable. Another important aspect is when it comes to privacy and freedom of expression, we've oftentimes confused the two notions and think that we can't have one without the other. But there are cases where you can actually have both. Recently in Yemen, we had the internet governance meetings. So we introduced new methodologies in which we could actually protect individual privacy as well as promote freedom of expression within our context. So working bottom up perhaps is the best way to understand regional needs, national needs, and then moving upward.
Thank you. So please send that submission in. I think we will respond at the end briefly to some of the questions, but some of our experts can also respond, but they had a second question now. We have basically 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask our experts, any remote participation? No? Okay. I'm going to ask our experts to take 2 minutes, maybe 3, to give their second bite, maybe address some of these things, and then Indrajit and I will sum up after that. So let's go in the order that we spoke. That's probably best. Pedro, you were the first.
Well, I addressed these 3 questions all together, so I'm going to make a short comment that has to do with the last question in terms of what kind of arrangement can help this to safeguard the exercise of privacy in relation to other rights. And I think that the big problem right now in connection with what I addressed at the beginning, that is right to be forgotten, that we are confusing information with personal data. And I cannot agree more with what Sylvia said about the lack of good framework for an updated framework for defamation on the online world, because what we are seeing now is that the legal institutions for privacy and data protections are used to address the concern on defamation, which they are completely different legal institutions and shouldn't be mixed. But we are saying that, and particularly in right to be forgotten. So this is my contribution.
Who came after you? It was Avery.
Thank you. In terms of listening, and I'm very glad that in terms of the access to the blind was actually added, because it was definitely something that I had left out in terms of the need to provide the enabling ability to use the internet for the blind. So I'm very glad that that was brought in. I also very much acknowledge what Lillian said, that the media and the internet as such basically is two-edged and can be used. And that's basically what always brings me back to this mindset issue. Because as long as we have populations and we have governments that are intent on not helping, not enabling, and actually disabling, it doesn't matter what tools we build. So it helps, and in fact, I think the most important tools we build are often the circumvention tools, so that the people that can't gain access because it's filtered or because it's monitored can actually get around those things. And that's another thing that I should have mentioned. I don't know whether that's within UNESCO's area to encourage the distribution and the use and the education in how to use circumvention tools to be able to have freedom of expression, to be able to have the ability to associate on the network without it turning into something dangerous to do. But if indeed that is within UNESCO's purview to sort of encourage and assist in the development and distribution of those circumvention tools, that is perhaps one way to actually help while waiting for the mindset to change. One thing about the length of the questionnaire, work on it offline and then cut and paste your answers in. It helps. It allows you to go away, come back. I'm still working on mine. But basically, I suggest that as a method as opposed to trying to do it in one sitting.
Yes, as my colleague Indrijit says, we don't expect everybody to have an answer to every question. So please take those questions where you really think you've got a unique contribution to make. We're not doing an opinion survey. It's not.
We're not testing your knowledge either.
So please, if you feel intimidated by all 30 questions, that's completely understandable. But we don't expect everybody to just be selective and give us depth. And well, we will have to. We have the big chore then to, well, exciting to actually take all this stuff and say how can we make sense of it. Okay, but we'll respond a bit more to those other questions later. So, Sylvia.
Thank you very much. I would like to make a brief comment on the hate speech online issue that has been mentioned here by several speakers, or by also notably our participants. And yes, we at the Council of Europe treat hate speech online very seriously. We have a campaign on that, and yet we are well aware of the difficulties when it comes to the definition and when it comes to the possibility of using also this argument against freedom of expression. So I think we need to look more into that, and I would hope that the input being given here through this very valuable work of UNESCO could help us further. And also, if we look into that, we see there the link between hate speech, generally speaking, and then hate crime. So this is where we are coming from, and if we have can benefit from your work there, that would also be very much appreciated. But as I said, we'll feed into that. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
I'm just going to say a few words about ethics and how it's a very important component for internet governance, I think, in general, and how it's overlooked. It's partially our fault as lawyers, because it's a really huge complementary element. For example, starting from your example, Jennifer Lawrence, I think, yeah, Jennifer Lawrence. So there are some serious ethical concerns on the journalists, of course, whether we can call these websites as journalism websites. So I remember the resolution of the Council of Europe on the right to privacy issued right after the death of Princess of Wales, I think in 1998, I think so. It set some standards for tabloid journalism as well. So you cannot harass people online. So these soft law documents are also useful. And also there are some ethical standards should be implemented by the users as well. So they publish it, but you don't necessarily have to view them. So it's like
I've been thinking of that. I can... Sorry? Okay, yeah, we have 3 minutes. So I'll say in 1 minute, I think it's about digital literacy skills. Because if you look at, say, the media, there are underlying issues, internet-related issues that they need to address. The issue of ethics, them understanding the technologies, and them knowing how to address the new challenges or opportunities the internet presents. But then also the individual users, it comes in terms of, context. We are still kind of getting people to connect to the internet back in the developing countries, whereas in the developed countries, people are connected. So the context also, I think, is something that probably will come out in the study, if you're to get responses from across the globe. And then you also look at digital defenders, I think that is sort of global. You have human rights defenders, you have people who are looking at children and women, you have people who are looking at LGBT. The context, should be coming out where they all need digital literacy skills in how to address the new challenges or opportunities, whatever issues that are coming out of the internet. And of course the policy makers. For us in developing countries, I would say Africa, we have this cut and paste. One policy, you sit down and you analyze a policy, say in East Africa, you find it's a cut and paste from one country to another. It's not actually addressing what is at hand. So all this needs to come out, and I'm sure it will come out in your findings. Thanks.
I certainly hope so. Marian?
I have 2 minutes. I'm addressing question 24 about our frameworks. Well, this is my moment to talk about the Charter of Human Rights and Principles for the Internet as an already existing framework to discuss both the ethics, the empirical, and the political issues at hand. The Charter now in Turkish, in English, and also Arabic, Spanish, and German includes clauses on freedom of expression, privacy, access. It has talked about surveillance before that became a hot topic. It is dealing with hate speech, perhaps in ways that lawyers might want to discuss. And it's actually articulating the key empirical areas of inquiry that this study wants to touch upon, and how our everyday lives, political processes, and ways of earning a living have all shifted online, whether we like it or not. And we need a framework. Others are calling for a global Magna Carta of digital rights. I would say we already have one. We've had one for 4 years. It's about to start a review. Please join us in our meeting and workshop this afternoon at 4:30, and the anonymity workshop online, which follows on this session. And I believe fervently in this charter, not because it's perfect, but because it's doable and it has been implemented. And I call on all of you to consider it and give us some feedback. But also there are other good statements at stake. Thank you.
Marian, I call on you to submit the charter, please, to this review. Nigel, can you take one minute, please?
I'll be very quick. It's very difficult to follow Marian. absolutely, whatever she says is right. We shouldn't endlessly reinvent things that have been invented. All I wanted to say in respect actually to 28, UNESCO's role. What is UNESCO's role? I think we see from this the breadth of this questionnaire, which has been brought up. This questionnaire is very wide-ranging. We see the breadth of UNESCO's role, and in terms of the evolution of the IG, the Internet Governance Ecosystem, which is something we've been talking about both at the IGF and ICANN and at Net Mondial, etc., etc. Where I see UNESCO playing an absolutely pivotal role, because we have meetings, we have, if you like, we have mechanisms to discuss technical issues like ICANN or ISOC or the RIRs and the ITU to discuss infrastructure issues and technical issues. Where we lack sometimes, and we have the Council of Europe, and the Council of Europe does this fantastic job, but it is Council of Europe, and although it's wider than just Europe, it doesn't have the breadth that the UNESCO should reach. So I think there is, as this questionnaire proves, a real role for UNESCO in coordinating some of this in some sort of multi-stakeholder forum, in some sort of process, not just a conference every 2 or 3 years, but some ongoing commitment. And I know you need a check to do that, so here is the check. Oh, sorry. But I know it's a resource issue, but I think you're well placed.
Thank you so much. I think we do need to end it there. I know we haven't answered some of the questions from people on the floor, but what I'd suggest is we take that offline after the session. I think Bangladesh, my colleague Indrajit is very interested. Okay. Courtney, you and I can speak, and the man from Ukraine, please let's pick that up afterwards. So, thank you so much. Thanks to our experts. Can we give them a round of applause? And thanks also to my colleague, Jan Hong.